Boss fights, don't you love them? I guarantee that before you started the series, you had definitely heard about From Software's absolutely astonishing catalogue of boss fights in each game. Nobody does it like FromSoft, they all say. But does he tell you about the runbacks? I bet they don't, and I don't blame them because it's almost a thing of the past at this point. With the modern days of Elden Ring, well, pretty much the scene post Bloodborne has been hammering down the running down aspect to each boss. And let's be honest, we don't miss them, do we? Replaying the older games, especially parts of Dark Souls 2 and pretty much the majority of Demon Souls, will have you trekking large parts of the level just to make it back to the boss. This is where shortcuts and a little more emphasis on level design came into play. The idea of piecing a level together so that once you've fully explored it, the run up to the boss seems like genius. Look at 1-1, you do a fucking hike and run across bridges away from a fire breathing dragon, yet when all is said and done, the run up to the boss is about 10 seconds thanks to the design of the level. Anyways, I'm pretty sure we've all been fed up with this procedure once or twice, you know, struggling with a boss only to end up struggling more trying to get back to the damn thing. And I feel like no other game has that issue been as apparent as in Dark Souls 2, so let's talk about it. Now if you're wondering if I have any criteria for this list, I kinda do. Firstly, how long the runback is, which is almost the main part. How much time are you actually wasting in between rounds of attempting the boss, because it can definitely start to add up over time. Secondly, how difficult the boss is that you're attempting. If you're likely to first try the boss, the runback doesn't really matter, does it? On the flip side, think about the really tough or annoying bosses that have excellent runbacks, and how much more annoying they'd be if they had you running for a minute between attempts. Thirdly, the runback itself. Things like how many enemies there are on the way and where the enemies are. Are you likely to need to waste some healing before the fight has even started? Those are the main points I'm considering when going about this top 10. All three of these aspects tying to each other, so just think of it as a mishmash of the three, and whatever I just despise doing the most will end up on top. If anything, these are more used as tiebreakers if I'm really torn on the placement between a couple of the runbacks. Well, with all that out of the way, let's kick things off with some of the lesser evils. At number 10 we have the Lost Sinner, which will most likely be everyone's first Lord Soul they get during their initial playthrough. The 10th place spot could have gone to a lot of other bosses. It was kinda like a throwaway spot, as contrary to popular belief, not all the runbacks in Dark Souls 2 suck. It's just a handful that really garner and drag the reputation down for this game. Some other runbacks that were in contention for this spot were the Demon of Songs, which can be annoying but isn't a runback that you'll ever be doing more than once. The Old Dragon Slayers, which can be a bit lengthy, but that's about it. The boss and the actual running are nothing to worry about. And the Skeleton Lords, who actually have a pretty irritating runback. You can definitely get tagged a few times by the enemies on the way, especially with the way they're placed through the journey. It would have been a guaranteed spot on the list, but once again, the Skeleton Lords are just not too hard of a boss, and one that you'll most likely complete in 1 or 2 tries. For the Lost Sinner however, she has a runback that garners a time of just over a minute for the trek across the entirety of Sinner's Rise. She's also a relatively tough boss, one of the more worrying foes for players in the game up until that point. There are a variety of methods to deal with her, but if players don't like the arena beforehand or are playing on New Game Plus, then I can easily see them dying to her a few times. You need to deal with trying to avoid the respawning Flexile Sentry on the way to her, as well as them annoying rupturing hollows that can dive at you, all whilst trying to navigate through the water that can slightly slow down your movements. A lot of the small nuisances combine together to really make this runback as long and troublesome as possible. Put this together with the moderately challenging difficulty of the fight and you have your 10th worst runback for Dark Souls 2. From one Lord Soul to another, the next entry on this list goes to the giant twin-headed arachnoid that lies at the bottom of Brightstone Cove Seldora. There's quite a bit going on with this one, which makes sense as the edit is just generally crazy with the amount of enemies scattered about. Starting from the lower Brightstone Cove bonfire, you've got to navigate your way through the level and back to that huge foreboding room with the dozen spiders to try and climb that ladder. Only there's a really bothersome spider drone just conveniently blocking your path, so you have to kite him around so you can climb the ladder or just kill him and risk taking damage. Going through the final room with the spider webs decorated all around serving as bridges is fine enough, though you are prone to taking fall damage if you aren't careful or are rushing a bit to try and get back to the boss. Don't forget there's a bunch of enemies on the ground waiting for you, but they shouldn't serve too much trouble as running past will do just the trick. You can also light a torch to scare the spiders off. I actually never thought of this during my playthrough, well, the running back portion of my playthrough, probably because I couldn't be bothered. All of this jacks the run back to just over a minute, in comparison to the Lost Sinners who was also just over a minute. Well, the boss itself isn't too hard. The Duke's Dear FREJA has its own unique tricks, only using one head to attack at a time being one of them, which means having to bait out one side at a time because the body is extremely resistant to physical damage. It is comparable in challenge to the Lost Sinner, with both taking you probably a few tries to complete. I'd say this boss is actually a little easier, but then you're probably wondering why the Runback is at 9 and the Lost Sinners is at 10. Well, it comes down to the actual Runback itself. Having to deal with this annoying prick to climb that ladder, and then the added effort required to traverse across the spider-webbed bridges, just slightly makes this one less desirable to me than the Runback at Sinner's Rise, and lands itself a spot at number 9 on today's list. Alright, time to get sucked into some DLC action. Coming in at number 8, we have the Afflicted the GANK squad. We have the GANK squad at number 8. Now I hope you didn't find the Lost Sinner or the Duke's Dear FREJA annoying in any particular way, because they were only the starters. The appetizers for the sheer nonsense that's about to come. It clocks in at about 45 seconds, probably a little longer, but yeah. The GANK squad's runback can be summarized in one word: confusing. Every path feels the same. The colour palette and the sheer spammage of enemies do not help you to figure your way about at all. Let me concentrate a little more on that phrase, sheer spammage of enemies, for a second. You are being hounded by enemies throughout the whole level. No matter the direction, there will be a trio of Sanctum Knights, but they aren't even the biggest threat, to be honest. It's these things! They are so annoying. My number one priority during the run back is to do exactly that. To run and to keep on running. Not stopping unless it's a ladder or an elevator or the damn boss fog. But these little shits are made just to stun you over and over, stopping you in your tracks, and if you're hit enough by them, you instantly die. It doesn't happen often, but just them repeatedly stunning you is enough to make my blood boil. They even have moving petrification spitting statues. The absolute cheek of From Software, man. This runback is like going through a gauntlet, and what's waiting for you on the other side? The GANK squad, who is an infuriating boss that's tough as nails for a lot of reasons. They are one of the hardest fights in the game, which inherently means doing the runback a bunch of times. The only reason that at number 8 is because that the ones ahead of this list are ones that I have personal issues with. Vendettas, you could say. But I could easily see this being top 3 for someone else's list. The fact that you'll be doing it a load of times is reason enough, but with that reason, you will, or at least I found it pretty routine after a while. Experiencing minimal trouble and being able to get from bonfire to Foggate with relative ease. By the end of my time with the GANK squad, I knew its runback inside and out, but that doesn't excuse all the harassment that it does to the player, which lands it a spot at number 8. I'm sure we're all familiar with the reputation Dark Souls 2 holds when it comes to runbacks. King of the garbage runbacks, you may say. I was aware, but I was enjoying my time with the game initially. Nothing fazed me too badly. Until I got to Huntsman's Corpse and went to fight the fucking Executioner's Chariot. There's not really much to say about this runback compared to the GANK squads, but there's two main issues. Firstly, the Executioner enemies. They are brutal. Never have I been swatted away right at the fog door so much. They're really persistent and will obliterate you if or when you stop, thanks to there being 4 of them on your way up to the boss. The second thing is the lack of iframes during the start of the entering animation. It's incredibly apparent here. Honestly, if there were complete iframes for it, then this runback probably wouldn't even feature on the list. But that simple, yet massive change created an absolutely abhorrent beast of a runback. You can do a jump to the side which makes the executioners execute themselves, leaving you to just get past the red phantom, but it does build on a bit of time, so doing that each run can add up in the grand scheme of things. The boss itself, the Executioner's Chariot, isn't too hard but can definitely give you some trouble. The first half of the fight has you dealing with a lot of regular mobs before you can fight the horse one-on-one. The whole thing just reeks of tedium, to be honest. Whilst not being as tough as the prior pick, the runback itself is a lot more tricky purely because of the end. It genuinely feels like a gamble as to whether or not you'll be able to get through, and then you gotta do a run through phase 1 before actually fighting the boss. If you manage to do it, then it'll clock it in at about 1 minute. One stress inducing minute, that's for sure. Closing out on the first half of the list, we have another DLC boss, and he's from the Crown of the Old Iron King. It's the Blue Smelter Demon, and there is a bloody ton going on here. Firstly, the run itself is about 45 seconds, really similar to the GANK squad in the way that it's not incredibly long, but the contents within the run make up for how much of a pain in the ass it can be. There's a shit ton of enemies ready to get you, so be prepared to bob and weave through all manner of physical onslaught. Also, there's dudes that will fire range magic towards you, which is an extra problem on the plane. But as if that wasn't enough, they added one of those giant warriors towards the end for one last attempt at clipping your health before entering the fog. Thankfully, this time you can actually get through the fog without having to hope for the devils look to be on your side. The worst thing about this run up has to be the astrologists though, who can cast Promised Walk of Peace to slow down your movement. In a run back where I'm having to dodge enemies twice my size, with weapons 5 times as big as mine, I'm also having to deal with reduced speed? This makes the run back so much more irritating, and it's not like you'll be one and done either. The boss waiting behind the fog for you is the Blue Smelter Demon, a quicker, more deadly version of the already challenging original from the Iron Keep. It's without a doubt a boss that you'll be dying to a lot. Unlike the GANK squad however, I couldn't really get used to this run back. It just constantly irked at me, maybe because the Blue Smelter is a boss that I really enjoy. They really wanted their co-op DLC areas to be as miserable as possible, huh? FromSoft wouldn't possibly include another awful co-op area with another abysmal run back, right? Shit. Kicking off our top 5, we have the run back to Sir ALONNE. These Dark Souls 2 co-op areas have some pretty awful things in common. The main thing being their enemy abusage around the levels. Except this time the enemies are the worst ones yet and are a big push for this being the number 5 spot. Firstly, the run to Sir ALONNE is pretty long, teetering a little over a minute, so a disadvantage over his counterparts in the GANK squad and Blue Smelter. 1 minute may be generous because the enemies here, which consist of a bunch of flame lizards and ALONNE knights, which together make for a pretty nasty combo. I just know the team were proud of themselves for the devious duo they created to terrorize the power player base. The ALONNE knights are deceptively quick and their strikes can catch you if you don't roll perfectly, and the flame lizards put additional pressure, lobbying nukes out of their mouths every 5 seconds. If you get tagged in a 1-2 combo by those attacks, then that's simply GG's. I'm not sure what to tell you. There's also the captains towards the end who wield bows, so you need to be very careful for them at the end when you're running through the last funnel to get to the boss fog, because they can snipe you if your luck is down. Man, it sucks too because Sir ALONNE is one of the best bosses of Dark Souls 2, but this run back can undoubtedly sour the experience because he is hard as a fucking priest at Disney World, meaning he's going to have his way with you and you're going to be doing this run back a bunch of times. Just shy of the top 3, we return to the main game and visit the Smelter Demon, who's the first boss of the notorious Iron Keep. You see, I actually kinda like this area, but the boss run to the original Smelter Demon hurts me to my core. If you play your cards perfectly, according to this well-made video by Domo3000, then you can get from the first bonfire to the boss fog in 43 seconds. But I, unfortunately, cannot do this run back perfectly. In fact, I was pretty much the opposite of that. What put the Smelter Demon so incredibly high on my list is once again the enemies, because once again we see the ALONNE knights and captains making their appearances on this list. They are the bane of my existence because whenever they show up in an area, my experience is about to be twice as tough. They are unrelenting and jump your ass like no other. I get this is probably a skill issue, but I could not for the life of me get through that boss fog without having to kill a few of them, even despawning them after a while. And the problem comes when you try and kill one, another one shows up, and another until you're spending 4 minutes cleaning the entire area when you should be beating the fucking boss. Once again, I have to attribute some of the blame to that ridiculous change of removing iframes from the beginning of the fog animation, because it makes things so much more problematic than it needs to be. And to top things off, the Smelter Demon is, in my experience, the toughest boss of the game up until that point, so I always die to it a fair few times. But it's not comparable to the amount of times I die trying to get to him. The Smelter Demon is a great boss, but his run back is a prime example of why they're just not needed, because if I'm spending more time on a run back to the boss rather than the actual boss itself, then come on, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? Alright, enough crying. Oh wait, there's 3 more to talk about. The boss of the Dragon Shrine makes his undeserved, or I guess very well deserved, appearance at 3rd place on this list. Now this one is a real bitch, and I know that on return playthroughs we are really sweating to kill this thing first try. The Dragon Shrine has a really interesting gimmick when it comes to its encounters. Each of them have a few Dragon Knights and more importantly one big Drake Keeper. If you kill the Drake Keeper, the smaller Knights will allow you to proceed onwards. If not, they will try and beat that ass into the ground. And as with a lot of runbacks in this list, there's no shortcut. So you're essentially trekking the whole level to get back to the boss, meaning you have to go through these encounters. You have to kill each Drake Keeper you come across, otherwise you are going to get flattened trying to make your way through that fog gate without iframes. These Drake Keepers are not easy however, and will probably make you chug an Estus flask or 2, already leaving you at a disadvantage if you get through the fog. All of this really cracks up the time of the run back to about 100 seconds, even more if you struggle against these enemies. A shortcut at the end would have really been a godsend for some of these levels, because there's no doubt we'll be despawning at that bonfire a myriad of times thanks to the boss, the Ancient Dragon. Another fight that's tough as nails, except this time it's not a good fight either. His health pool is absolutely enormous and his attacks deal a fuck ton of damage. His large body combined with some of his moves have you in extremely awkward situations, and the fight is just an incredibly slow and tedious slog. It's like fighting that Elder Dragon from Elden Ring, except here you're actually getting a fight, yet it's somehow even worse. What a lovely way to kickstart the top 3. Coming in the penultimate spot is the boss who concludes Dark Diver Grandel's quest, Darklurker. Jesus Christ, where do I even begin with this one? Well, firstly, there's multiple routes available for the player to take if they want some variety with this runback, but everyone is taking the route in Castle Drangleic. It's the quickest one by far, as there's a bonfire right near the NPC, but before you even jump through the portal, you need to pay a human effigy to enter. Why? It's not just a throwaway item. Human effigies are an important resource for the player. Having to spend one each time feels just so wasteful, and there's even a possibility that if you run out of human effigies, you'll be left to farm them to attempt the Darklurker boss. What? I'm sorry, but that's insane. It's not like Darklurker's easy either. It's another really challenging boss and probably the most dynamic one, with a range of moves that'll take players a few turns to even adjust to, never mind killing. The actual runbacks themselves take around 2 minutes to complete, which is getting to an absurd amount of time here. Why is the need to be spending so much time between rounds just to attempt a boss? It really damages the replay value. I can imagine so many players just refusing to do this whole ordeal again on subsequent playthroughs. These Dark Chasm of Olds all include 3 or 4 NPC style enemies who you have to kill before you are even allowed to have a crack at the boss. They're not incredibly difficult, but they're not pushovers either, and honestly, you very well may end up despawning some of the enemies after so many tries. Once again, it's a real shame because just like Sir ALONNE and the Blue Smelter Demon, Darklurker is actually a great boss, my favourite from the base game, but the runback really dampens the experience. Well, let's get to the number 1 spot on this list, though you all already knew who it was going to be right from the very beginning. I'm sure there was no surprise, no suspense, none of that. There was never any doubt as to who the king of the bullshit runbacks could go to. The king's pets from the 3rd DLC, the Crown of the Ivory King, Lud and Zallen. What can I even say that hasn't already been said? Everything about this runback is an absolute kick to the nuts. The frigid outskirts is this massive expansive plain, chalk filled with just snow and snow for what the eye can see. You have to go from start to end to get back. Wait, hold up, you don't even start in the frigid outskirts. You need to take that sleigh-like coffin down to get there for starters, which is already a waste of time. It takes a whopping 3 minutes to get back to the boss. I can't even begin to explain how painful that is. Everything about this is painful. It's not even a runback at this point, it's a damn pilgrimage. And the time to get there isn't even the worst thing about it. This area has this design choice where there are snowstorms that happen repeatedly. This damages your player's vision and makes the path going forward incredibly disorientating, leading to you going around in circles, confused and lost and just annoyed as all hell. If that wasn't bad enough, the snowstorms make way for these bastards to come in. The reindeer, who are some of the most overtuned and absurd enemies in the game. These coked up fuckers can fly, goddammit, they can fucking fly! Challenging to deal with alone, and multiple can spawn in at once, heckling you and making the trek back to the boss take even longer. Don't forget that the time of 3 minutes is like a best case scenario. Anyways, you do all this, go through all that pain, and you get to face Lud and Zallen, a gank boss who's also a reskin of a boss that you've already fought in the same DLC. That is absolutely crazy. That is absolutely insanity. This is one of the worst things I've ever had the displeasure of doing in not only one of the Souls games, but just any game in general. Shout out to the gang, Vengal, FREJA and O'Hara for supporting me through this journey. Couldn't have done it without them, I'd have gone beyond insane. Seriously, would it have killed FromSoft to include some shortcuts in these levels? I'm forever grateful that we've moved past this design choice for the Souls series. Though this did feel somewhat cathartic, it's nice to have a place to vent out your frustrations sometimes. Honestly though, if you did make it to the end of the video, then thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed your stay here. Do me a favour, would you? If you enjoyed, like and subscribe to the channel. We're looking to make strides and soar high to the skies. I've been your host Adobo. I hope you all have a wonderful day, week, rest of the year, whatever. I'll see you next time, and peace!